Listen closely, because what you're about to hear is not just another shutdown story, not just another both sides argument from Washington. This is the story of a president trapped by the courts, his term spiraling because he chose the one line you never cross in a civilized country. He chose to weaponize food. The title of this moment is simple: Trump trapped in court as his term spirals. We begin with a victory that does not feel like victory. The government is about to reopen. On paper, that sounds like relief. On paper, it sounds like stability. On paper, it sounds like Washington got it together. But listen to the details. The deal that is reopening the government has people on at least one side of the aisle furious. Yes, there are elements that will help Americans. SNAP, the anti-starvation program, looks like it will finally be allowed to do what Congress intended. Payments that were unlawfully frozen will go out. People will be able to buy food again. But behind that, there is another layer, a darker layer, a legal war that played out in front of two different judges in New England, then in the First Circuit Court of Appeals, then in front of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, and finally at the United States Supreme Court, which effectively voted to starve Americans, even if they did it with polite procedural language. To unpack it, we go inside the courts with someone who has been on the front line since day one of this administration, New Jersey Attorney General Matt Platkin, from the Garden State. He is not talking theory. He is reporting from the trenches. He joins the conversation with host Michael Popok of Legal AF, a show that has walked people through these filings in real time. Popok sets the table. There were two coordinated lawsuits. One was brought by the states, led by Platkin, in front of Judge Talwani. The other was filed by public interest groups in front of Judge McConnell. Trap Donald Trump and his administration between two judges, two sets of plaintiffs, two cases that converge on the same simple question. Can the federal government refuse to use money that Congress specifically set aside during an emergency so that people do not starve? Platkin says, "Look, we filed a lot of lawsuits this year. I never thought I would have to sue the federal government to stop them from distributing 12,000 machine guns into New Jersey. That is a real lawsuit we filed. You covered it. But this one takes the cake. Why? Because the Trump administration was not trying to move money from one pot to another. They were not arguing about a regulatory detail. They were bending themselves backwards, like Olympic-level gymnasts, trying to invent a legal way to keep Americans from eating. He brings it home with numbers. In New Jersey alone, more than 800,000 people rely on SNAP. About 350,000 of them are children. There are more kids on SNAP in New Jersey than there are people living in the largest city in the state. For the first third of the month, the federal government seemed to take almost a twisted joy in starving them. For weeks leading up to the crisis, Platkin's office and attorneys general across the country lived in chaos. It felt like a high school intern was running their SNAP analysis, he jokes, except it was not funny. The way the administration instructed states to process payments made no sense to anyone who has ever seen the actual systems that move money onto cards. 2 to 3 weeks of non-stop confusion. States begged for clarity. The administration's answer was cruelty wrapped in incompetence. And then the courts stepped in. The states sued in front of Judge Talwani. The public interest groups sued in front of Judge McConnell. Different plaintiffs, slightly different legal theories. Same core question. Can the president decide that people will starve in direct defiance of a statute where Congress said use this money in an emergency so they do not starve? The First Circuit Court of Appeals issued a unanimous decision, 3-0, a 23-page opinion fully backing the states and their position. The opinion spoke openly about food security as a fundamental part of life in America. It warned that taking away food security causes emotional, physical, and health harms that cascade through families and communities. In any normal world, that is where the story ends. You lose in district court. You lose again in the appeals court. You accept that you cannot starve people to win a political fight. But this is the Trump era. So instead of accepting the rule of law, they ran to the Supreme Court and asked for permission to keep starving people. Think about that. The emergency application was not about some obscure regulatory tweak. It was about whether the administration could withhold billions in already appropriated SNAP funds so that, for days and weeks, cards would not work and families would have empty refrigerators. Before we talk about how the Supreme Court handled it, we have to talk about what Trump did on the ground. On election day, as people below the poverty line were worrying about food, Donald Trump trolled them. He signaled that he would defy existing court orders and refuse to pay SNAP. He tried to pin the blame on Democrats for the starvation that his own administration was actively causing. So how did that go? Not well. Because on the Friday they lost in court. USDA did something surprisingly decent. Platkin gives them credit. They sent out written guidance, clearly telling states, go ahead and make the full payments. Process them. Get the money out. The states did exactly that. They did not wait. They won in court, got the guidance, and moved fast so that people could eat. Families who had been unlawfully denied food for days finally saw light at the end of the tunnel. Then the spiral accelerated. The very next day, the Trump administration reversed course. They said the payments were improper. They told states they would be punished to the fullest extent of the law for complying with the court order and following USDA's own written guidance from 24 hours earlier. They even threatened to claw back the money, which you cannot legally do once SNAP benefits are paid. Why the whiplash? Platkin gives you the quiet part out loud. Once the money had been paid, Trump's emergency appeal to the Supreme Court was gutted. It was no longer about, do not make us make the payment. Now it was, we already made the payment. That undercut their narrative. So instead of accepting reality, they scrambled to create a new crisis. They tried to retroactively punish states for following the law. Platkin describes nights where his staff worked straight through, driven by one simple fear. If they made a mistake, real people would not eat. He reminds everyone listening that he took the same oath the federal lawyers did. He went to law school. He went into public service. And he cannot understand what part of their oath says. Use your power to starve children. He asked the question simply. How do you get up in the morning and decide that is what you are going to use your legal skills for? Popok steps back and looks at the political frame. He says plainly, America does not tolerate a president with no heart. He compares Trump to a character out of The Wizard of Oz. No brain, no heart. And historically, what do we do with heartless presidents? We run them out on a rail. He points out that whatever strange spectacle happened at Butler, Pennsylvania, where Trump played crypto king and promised to make his family rich, those theatrics stop working when people are living in a crushing economy, and then watch their own president try to starve the poorest among them. That is a bridge too far for most Americans. The polling is starting to reflect that. Platkin is careful about polling. He says he will leave that to experts. But he does say this when people went to the polls and complained that the cost of everything is too high. They were not asking the government to take away food assistance. They were not asking for a scenario where, after 10 days of unlawful withholding, they finally go to swipe their SNAP card at the grocery store, and it fails. That was never anyone's political mandate. It also is not what the law allows. He calls Congress dysfunctional, says it has been that way for a long time, says Republicans in Congress have essentially handed over their constitutional authority to this president, especially through the courts. Instead of winning arguments through legislation, they choose something else, weaponizing food. The presidency. The Senate with its narrow but real control through deals and procedural tools. And a Supreme Court that has sided with Trump in roughly 86% of the emergency requests he has made. The First Circuit opinion, he says, put in sharp relief the lack of morals of one of the two political parties. The court wrote about food security as a basic right. When you take it away, you harm people emotionally, physically, and medically. It is not an abstract budget line. It is basic life. Platkin adds another dimension. He talks about what happens when you spend too long inside the Washington bubble. You forget reality. You think in abstractions and leverage and spin. Meanwhile, he is out in real communities. He is walking through food banks that have seen surges of people desperate for help. He reminds everyone this is the first time since SNAP existed that anything like this has happened. He warns against getting lost in acronyms. SNAP is not a policy slogan. It is food for 42 million people. It is the difference between kids having something in the fridge or staring at empty shelves. As a parent, he says he cannot fathom doing this to families. The public servants in his office were nauseous. They felt the weight of possibly failing people who did nothing wrong and relied on the government to carry out a very basic obligation. He says the Trump administration is not just hurting people now. They are sending a message about future shutdowns. They are signaling that if they need leverage, they will go to the darkest place. The third rail. They will torment and starve the most underprivileged in America to win some separate fight. He contrasts that with what most Americans want. Most of us, he says, want to wrap our arms around people who are struggling. We do not need a president to be consoler-in-chief every day, but we do need him to have enough heart to know there are some lines you never cross. Starving kids, seniors, and veterans is one of those lines. He compares the Republican Party to pilots who accidentally fly upside down and do not know it. They have lost all bearings. Platkin says he heard from people all over New Jersey, including people not on SNAP, who were just shocked. Wait. People are not going to get their food. That is why the lawsuit matters. Not just to fix one crisis, but to make it illegal to ever do this again. He hoped for bipartisan condemnation. And to some extent, there was bipartisan anger. But he did not see the White House standing up firmly and saying, "Never again." He points out that food security does not know party registration. You cannot tell from a SNAP card whether the child's parents are Democrats, Republicans, or independents, and he does not care. They are entitled not to starve. Then the corruption piece lands. Popok explains that while all this was happening, while people were starving and while healthcare costs were being jacked up as part of a broader legislative deal, there was a quiet provision slipped into the bill in the dark of night by the Senate Majority Leader, a provision that allows a handful of senators to retroactively collect hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars in taxpayer money for their legal costs. Why did they have legal costs? Because search warrants were issued for their phone records in legitimate criminal investigations into attempts to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power, with fake electors, with efforts to help Donald Trump overturn the election. That is not persecution for doing honest work. That is being investigated for potentially corrupt acts. Yet now those same people can turn around and take up to $500,000 each from taxpayers to cover their legal bills. Popok says go ask a SNAP recipient, someone with $350 on their EBT card, whether they would like $500,000 to pay for food. We all know the answer. Platkin says he comes from New Jersey, a state with an unfortunate history of corruption. He has seen it up close. His office prosecutes it. He says if you want people to trust government, you do not reward officials who got themselves in the middle of criminal investigations. You hold institutional power accountable. You act with integrity. You deliver results. Instead, this Congress, this President, this Supreme Court chose something else. They jacked up healthcare costs. They took food off the table. They rewarded themselves. Popok gives a perfect example of Trump's priorities. During the shutdown, while others were fighting to reopen the government and stop the starvation, Donald Trump stayed at Mar-a-Lago playing golf. As soon as he came back to Washington, the first thing he managed to organize was not a plan to feed people, not a plan to fix SNAP, not a plan to stabilize healthcare. It was a meeting to bury the Epstein files and to figure out how to kill a discharge petition that Representative Grijalva from Arizona's 7th District is expected to sign. He is worried about what is in the Epstein files. He is not worried about what is in American stomachs. Platkin and Popok also refuse to let Senator Chuck Schumer off the hook. Popok reminds viewers that this is not the first time Schumer crafted a big, beautiful bill that undercut core protections and then got backlash. There was a better way to do this, Popok says, a way that did not harm the American people, a way that did not tie food security to a corrupt giveaway to sitting senators. They turned back to the Supreme Court. The path was simple. Judge Talwani ruled. Judge McConnell ruled. The First Circuit affirmed and ordered $8 billion in November SNAP benefits to be paid in full. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson issued a short temporary stay so the First Circuit could rule. The circuit ruled strongly in favor of the states and against Trump. At that point, the Supreme Court had a clear choice. They could deny Trump's emergency request and tell the administration, clearly and publicly, you cannot starve people. Congress created contingency funds specifically for this, a rainy day pool, so that, when the government shuts down, Americans still eat. Instead, the Supreme Court referred the matter to the full court and decided to sit on it until Thursday night, effectively giving Trump's team more days of leverage and food insecurity. They wanted to see if the political winds would change, if the government would reopen and spare them from having to take a stand on SNAP. Platkin says that if the president wants to do things he disagrees with, but does them legally, that is his right. That is politics. But the president does not have the right to starve people and withhold funds that keep food in refrigerators. The court could have said that plainly. It would not have been hard. He notes that in the hearing in front of Judge McConnell, the judge asked Trump's lawyers a simple question: give me options. How could you legally do what you are proposing? They had no answer. Just like in the birthright citizenship case, when Trump tried to rewrite the 14th Amendment on his first night in office at 8 in the evening, and the administration could not explain how states would implement it. Platkin says these are not serious people. They are not serious about governing. They are not serious about legality. And they certainly are not serious about the lives they are disrupting. He says he is past the point of hoping they wake up one morning, look in the mirror, and have a spiritual crisis about what they are doing. But he does note that someone in USDA on that Friday did the right thing. They read the opinion, respected the court, and told states to make the payments. That was the legal and moral thing to do. Then someone higher up saw it, got angry, and reversed it. They decided to punish the states that complied with the court and fed their people. California. Attorney General Rob Bonta told Platkin that in his state, some merchants were so afraid of Trump's threats that they refused to accept SNAP cards even when they had sufficient balances. People walked into stores with money on their card for milk, bread, eggs, basic food, and the merchant said, "I am scared to take this card." That is what happens when a federal government uses hunger as a political weapon. Popok then asks Platkin what else is on the horizon. Platkin mentions a Supreme Court petition involving one of their birthright citizenship cases, where the federal government tried to reinterpret citizenship rules so radically it would have rolled back rights settled after the Civil War. He reminds everyone that attorneys general do more than sue the president. They are stepping up because the federal government, especially the Department of Justice under Trump, has abandoned many of its core missions like civil rights and public integrity. Platkin sued Amazon for widespread pregnancy discrimination. He strengthened gun violence prevention, making New Jersey one of the safest states in the country. He points out that you are 6 times more likely to be shot and killed in Mississippi than in New Jersey. He is holding social media and tech platforms accountable for harming children. He is doing the work the federal government will not do. Popok notes that the Civil Rights Division and Public Integrity Division at DOJ have been gutted or twisted into tools to protect the powerful instead of the vulnerable. Platkin adds a final insult. The Department of Justice is now going to process claims from Senators Wall, who want reimbursements for being investigated. Democrats proposed a fund to support ordinary people targeted by Trump's abuse of power. That did not make it into the final bill. Instead, the money went to members of Congress, who are under scrutiny for their alleged role in trying to overturn the election. It is a perfect snapshot of the corruption. And yet, despite all that, Platkin reminds everyone that he has sued the Biden administration too. Of this with the Harris administration, and they withheld food from 850,000 people in his state. His name would be on that complaint as well.